Okay, the reaction to the Netflix twins documentary was as close to a bomb going off in nutrition science as I can remember.
We actually saw profound changes based on what diet they were eating.
I even felt the aftershocks in the mountains. So here I am on the most gorgeous day for skiing ever, and my phone won't stop vibrating.
You have 126 new messages. They're coming in hot.
And so I watched this part of the show and I was like, no way. I like screamed at
A lot of people have asked me to make a reaction video to it. I'm sorry, guys. I can't even. This literally is so devoid of any kind of scientific merit or even scientific claims. It's foolishness.
All that phone noise was to ask Chris, can you please bring some clarity to the controversy over the Stanford twin study?
Sort of vegan propaganda, I think these twin studies, something along those lines.
Hey Siri, can you help with this?
Sorry, even AI can't make sense of what humans say on the internet.
It all started innocently enough when Stanford published a fairly simple paper where they compared how identical twins fared when one ate a healthy omnivorous diet for 8 weeks and the other ate a healthy vegan diet. It generated some headlines and what I thought was normal pushback from the internet. It caught my attention because I've never been able to answer how a 100% plant-based diet compares to an omnivorous diet with a little bit of animal foods, at least for longevity. I definitely have a horse in this race because my background is earth science, and like most of us, we're freaking out about what's happening to the planet. So we go plant-based in very large numbers and then wonder, is a 100% plant-based diet as healthy as one with a little bit of animal food? Scientists who actually run long-term longevity studies all say all longevity diets are very plant-dominant, but I'm not aware of those scientists being 100% plant-based. A fascinating second paper about the Stanford twin study came out in preprint form a month after the first, but it didn't get much notice. It's about biological markers of aging called epigenetics, such as telomeres. I'm always interested in who the authors are and talking to them. For example, Kate Ward is the co-first author of the first paper, and her blog makes clear she's an omnivore.
Looking at your blog, it looks like you recommend meals with chicken and beef and omnivorous meals. So are you biased towards being an omnivore?
I don't know if I'd say I'm biased. I call myself plant-based. The way we frame it is you're eating mostly plants, but using meat as a supplementary in the meal. So plants are the star, and you can use animal-based products to, let's say, using yogurt to top something or having meat be a very small portion of a meal. So that's the way I tend to eat.
The second author of the epigenetics paper, Louie Psihoyos, is a Stanford scientist who leans into a Mediterranean version of a keto diet with fish.
I am on a low carb and maybe even keto. I don't know because I don't count but I am more fish and olive oil, and you can do a keto Mediterranean.
3 authors are on both papers, Christopher Gardner, who is famously vegan, and the Sonnenbergs, who are acclaimed microbiome researchers. The 3 of them published a fascinating paper in 2021 comparing volunteers on a very high-fiber, fully plant-based diet to volunteers on a very high fermented food diet, which included fermented dairy along with high-fiber foods. They reported that the volunteers with high fermented food intake fared better with lower markers of inflammation. So Stanford scientists are not the vegan mafia the internet thinks they are. That paper inspired Tony to make our own yogurt from soy milk in the Instapot, by the way. The bomb dropped when Netflix published their documentary, You Are What You Eat, in January, which is the prime month for thinking about health. And the internet lost its mind.
The other red flag, I think, is, just in the name of the miniseries alone, right? You are what you eat. Like,
you're a plant?
Yeah, no. I'm meat.
Yeah, right? Yes, exactly.
I want to be lean protein, so I'm gonna base my diet around lean protein.
Yes.
I'm not a tomato.
Hey Siri, what do you think about that?
Does this mean I should recommend horse owners feed their horses lean meat? Horses are not oats.
I've never seen a scientific study where a film crew was present throughout.
You had a film crew the whole time following everybody around. Did that help adherence? Did the twins perform a little better because they knew they were going to be on a film?
Oh, I can imagine they did. And I want to clarify too, so only 4 sets of the twins had the Netflix crew following them around. So there were 44 twins. So 8 of those had the Netflix crew, following them around. Those are the 8 that are featured in the documentary. So we actually did a sensitivity analysis to remove those 8 twins, and we had very similar outcomes, which was exciting to see because, that's something that I would think would encourage me to really stick to my diet if I had someone filming me.
Well, I can't blame anyone for confusing Netflix's documentary with Stanford science, but they're not at all the same, and the backstory is absolutely fascinating. The director, Louie Psihoyos, is a force of nature.
The more I dive into your life, you're quickly becoming the most interesting man alive. And in case I forget, I want to talk about your photography career.
He was a National Geographic photographer for 17 years. I understand how a career like that can rock your world because they see what Earth scientists see and everyday people don't see and don't want to see. Louie directed The Cove about dolphin fishing in Japan and won an Academy Award for Best Documentary. The film revealed that since dolphins are not fish, regulations that restrict mercury levels in fish did not apply. So toxic, mercury-laden dolphin meat was being fed in school lunches in Japan because the public just didn't know. In time, he came to see what every scientist sees when they research things like pandemics, antibiotic resistance, pathogens, that modern animal agriculture is the root cause. And that caused him to ask the question that I think most people have, including nutrition scientists. Is a well-designed plant-based diet as healthy as a well-designed omnivorous diet like the Mediterranean? Louie appeared on Rich Roll's podcast before his Netflix special came out. Rich didn't seem to know it was in the works, so Louie explained it.
The premises of it is fairly simple. I wanted to address this idea. People said, oh, I'm Northern European, I'm black, I'm this, I'm that. My genetics are such that I have to eat this way. So I thought, well, what if you gave identical twins, one a healthy vegan diet, another one a healthy omnivore diet, and then we measured everything we possibly can. You know, from the usual stuff of blood pressure, cholesterol, weight, et cetera, but get into the epigenetics, get into these new biological markers that we didn't have the tools with, very well 7 years ago.
Like microbiome, things like that.
Yeah. And so we're working with Stanford University, and we have identical twins where we had this very rigorous...
Are you working with the Sonnenfelds?
I am.
You are. Excellent.
Yeah.
Cool.
And the Scherzeyes.
Oh, nice.
For cognitive testing. And to me, it was like, okay, I don't know what the results are going to be, and people were, my plant-based friends were like, well, what if it doesn't work in your favor? It's like, well, I'm interested in the science. I want to find out what's going on in our bodies. And so if you take identical twins, you've taken out these variables, right? The scientists over at Stanford, they were saying, save your money. You're not going to see anything happen in 8 weeks. It's not a long enough time frame. And now, I'm not going to tell you the results, but they've changed their parameters for studies now based on that one study.
I have to say, I take zero credit for the idea. Really, what happened was the producer, Louie Psihoyos, came to a development officer at Stanford and said, hey, we'd like to talk to some researchers about doing a study in it. Probably Gardner and Sonnenberg, because they do what we are interested in, diet and the microbiome. And they were the first ones who said, what would you think about using twins? And I thought, oh my God, I've done studies forever. That sounds super clever, but boy, what a pain in the butt to recruit twins. And they said, oh no, we have a whole bunch of twins lined up for this. And I thought, oh my God, this is so cool. In all our studies where we randomly assign people, part of the reason we randomly assign them is try to balance out who exercises more or less, sleeps better or worse, et cetera. We can never randomize for genes, like they all have their own genes. Oh my God.
And you had some criteria. You limited how high their blood pressure could be, how high their BMIs could be, how high their LDL could be. So you got pretty healthy twins in general. Do you think the effect would have been more pronounced if you were able to select twins outside of that criteria?
It's always fun to see something happen. And so I think if you were to start with a broader range, you might see more changes in certain individuals, but we wanted our study to be generalizable to your kind of general healthy audience.
I said the Netflix documentary and the Stanford science were not the same. I think they were different in two ways. One, a small way which humiliated Christopher Gardner, and two, a big way that I think contributed to some of the one-star reviews. Oh, you want to see Christopher humiliated?
For the sexual arousal pornography thing, which just made my eyes roll, I was thinking, oh my God, nobody even told us about that till we saw the dang thing released. Oh God, who's going to attribute that to us? That had nothing to do with us.
The film also did a few DEXA scans, and Stanford didn't.
I will say that we knew about the body composition scans with DEXA, which stands for dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. that part's really expensive. And we said, we really can't do that. Go ahead and do that yourself. And they did. And so a lot of people have been writing me saying, hey, I've read your published paper. Where are the DEXA data? Please share those. And those will never be published. They were only done in 8 people. That's not a publishable kind of study.
I got a text from a company founder who said it was such a shame that the budget didn't allow for DEXA scans for everyone, and had he known that, he would have paid for them. Louie said some very interesting things about the few DEXA scans they did do.
Well, and here's the other thing that was astounding, and I don't think anybody was really looking at this, is we did, DEXA scans. And it's also really great for analyzing visceral fat. And for people who don't know, visceral fat is not the fat that's around, that's the pinchable fat, it's the fat that's around your organs.
Yeah.
And if you have 4 pounds or more of visceral fat, you start to get into the region of metabolic diseases like diabetes, cancers, and heart disease. Mm-hmm. And the vegans, it just melted off. It was, that shocked everybody, because you think, well, with carbs or whatever, you think, well, maybe they're going to be adding on more weight. And it was just the opposite. And it was the unhealthiest of fats that the vegans were losing, the fat around the organs.
But the big polarizing difference is Louie went far beyond Stanford science. Nick Norwitz called that bait and switch. Honestly, I think that's legit. Many of the people who are interested in issues beyond markers of health, like I am, were probably the ones to give 5 stars. But if you just came for the health data, you probably saw things you didn't want to see, like the environmental impact of beef and cruelty to animals. So how would the combination of 5- and 1-star reviews affect its popularity? Some of you know I spent some decades in Silicon Valley tech, working among people half the world thought were 5-star people, and the other half thought were 1-star. I knew 3 of these 4, but not Elon. When Amazon was a bookstore and introduced user reviews, the publishers became enraged and threatened to sue Amazon out of business because of the 1-star reviews some of their best authors were getting. So Jeff Bezos analyzed sales versus ratings and discovered most best-selling books got both 1- and 5-star ratings. That shut the publishers up. The question is, are the 1-star reviews legit? I don't know about you, but I bought several things on Amazon where I wished I'd looked at the 1-star reviews before buying. And this is where I question my life's choices. There is a tsunami of social media stars and best-selling authors who panned both Netflix and Stanford. Peter Attia wrote The Study Fails Science 101. I could be doing simple interviews with people I admire like other YouTubers do. But no, for some reason I responded to requests to comment on the bad reviews.
Oh, poor baby. Suck it up, Buttercup. You can't just ignore the disinformation that's harming so many people.
Maybe the best thing I can do is to identify patterns. Many of the same people respond the same way to new studies, and knowing their pattern can help us understand their responses whenever a new study arrives. For example, Nina Teicholz's pattern is to isolate the most prominent scientists and make things up about them. She's a defender of beef and dairy, so prominent scientists whose findings suggest reducing consumption of those foods end up on her list.
So is Christopher Gardner doing like vegan advocacy? Well, I discovered that his course where he talks about health, he says he doesn't even mention health. He says he's not really interested in diet and health outcomes. Even he's in the medical school, right? People go to the medical school to learn about personal health. But what Gardner's interested in are labor rights issues around raising meat. He's interested in saving the environment. He's interested in animal rights issues. Those are the issues that motivate him, which would be fine if he were in the School of Sociology, but he's in the School of Medicine, and his job is to try to figure out how to help people understand how they can be healthier.
It only takes a simple Google search to see Stanford Medicine offers a master's degree in community health, and one of the courses Christopher teaches is Healthy Sustainable Food Systems. He's simply teaching what the School of Medicine has asked him to teach. The School of Medicine naturally feels a responsibility to teach it because food systems have such an enormous impact on human health. We can all think of a dozen ways they do, from pesticides to antibiotic resistance. He also teaches a course in human biology about nutrition. Nina recently made up things about Harvard's Walter Willett after Harvard published their paper showing a strong link between red meat and diabetes. I made an episode about that. Both Walter and Christopher are key targets for the beef industry because both have big voices in sustainability, and beef is by far the biggest offender. I just gave a talk about that at Cambridge University. Christopher gave a keynote about it to the American Heart Association. I'll link that in the description. I often think of Nina when I think of David Michaels' exceptional book, The Triumph of Doubt. Nina's pattern has been phenomenally successful in casting doubt about our leading scientists, universities, and food guides around the world. I often miss my days of caddying for national treasure Jack LaLanne in the 60s when his message was so simple. If it was made by man in a factory, don't eat it. If it came from a cow or a pig, don't eat it. Load up on fruits and vegetables and do your exercises, kids. Tragically, the food giants triumphed over the last century, and everyday people no longer know what to believe. Key to food industry success were fictional campaigns against people like Christopher and Walter, whose messages are as simple as Jack's and pretty much the same. The second pattern comes from supplement salesmen. For whatever reason, the supplement salesmen who bring in serious money, like Mark Sisson, Mercola, and Liver King do, are selling high-priced supplements largely to male high-meat eaters. Hence the masculine marketing. The best way to sell supplements is via social media, and the most viral campaigns contain what everyone wants to hear. Meat and butter are good for you and the planet. For example, Paul Saladino recommends a very high meat and high supplement diet. Just a 3-bottle pack of his supplements marketed with words like warrior is $120 a month. The claims are beef has all the nutrients you need for optimum health, and for optimum health, you need these supplements. The supplement salesmen pump out episodes fast, so there isn't much time for fact-checking.
The researchers are very proud of the fact that the vegan twins lost more weight than the omnivore twins. But if you dig more into what actually happened, you see that the researchers provided the vegan twins with less calories. Well, that will result in more weight loss.
You get slammed a lot, no matter how often you respond to this, that you restricted the calories for the vegans.
Yeah, I think that's a funny one. We really tried to address this in the paper to say we gave the same amount of calories.
So we didn't deliver different calories, they ate different calories.
I have a unique perspective on why that might have been.
When I look at that chart of the breakdown, it looks like the big difference was not in the number of vegetables and other things in the diets, it was animal foods versus legumes. I mean, it looked like a study of substituting animal products for legumes.
Yeah, I mean, well, think about it. When you're eating a vegan diet, you are usually supplementing the meat in the meal with legume. Let's say you're serving a burger, and then you might serve a black bean burger instead. A lot of the products are typically substituted with some kind of legume product. We didn't necessarily recommend substituting one for one, but a lot of the time, if you were then taking out the meat, it would be some kind of bean-based product.
Psychologist Tara Fazzino has done amazing research to figure out which foods are hyperpalatable, meaning the ones we can't stop eating. I made an episode about that. High on the list of hyperpalatable foods are meat dishes, and low on the list are legumes. Beef is the iconic American fast food that we can't stop eating, but most people don't overeat bean dishes. I think supplement salesmen are the perfect example of Upton Sinclair's timeless statement. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it.
One of the parts in this documentary that was most frustrating to me was when they had a regenerative farmer cooking kale and saying that he was eating less regenerative beef, or that regenerative agriculture of animals like cows was not scalable. This is crazy.
General Mills famously paid a consulting firm to produce a glossy report that they used to market their Epic brand of jerky. The claim was you could raise beef in pastures in a way that restores carbon to the soil. But the report acknowledged that it takes 2.5 times the amount of land to do that. Our World in Data points out that beef is like no other food for land use. Even now, when the majority of it comes from industrial farms that use less land, it's more like 10x the land use of any other food. We've deforested almost half the earth for agriculture, and 80% of the deforestation of the Amazon is to find more land for beef. Now try to multiply the beef component of that by 2.5. My granddaughter Penny watches my episodes and had this to say.
Even 7th graders can do that math. I would know because I am one.
And many people will argue that plant agriculture goes to feed the cows, but when you actually look at the data, only about 13% of what ruminant animals, cows, eat is consumable by humans. 13%.
That's true, and it's because so much alfalfa is fed to cows. We don't need to grow millions of acres of alfalfa to feed chickens, pigs, and humans.
So if you want to have healthy land to grow plants, you can do that by placing animals on the land and letting them eat the grass, live like they always have for millions of years as ruminants in the United States or around the world. That is the way to protect our soils and to protect our lands.
That's also true. Just look at Yellowstone, where bison, wolves, and antelope live like they have for millions of years. When they die, they return all their carbon to the soil. But when we raise cows for food, they and their huge mass of carbon go to McDonald's and restaurants in your neighborhood and then down your toilet.
You would not believe the mother load I just dropped.
Not back to the soil on the farm. So how did General Mills see carbon build up in the soil by grazing cows at White Oaks pasture? They did it by sleight of hand. They let pigs and chickens roam the fields and poop out the feed they buy for them at the feed store. The carbon is coming from the feed store off the farm. Every environmental scientist knows this, and I'll link a great report from Oxford University about it in the description. You might ask, how could Paul have such a different point of view? Is it because he's not a scientist involved in environmental research? I think it's because his entire reputation and apparently his income depends on him not seeing it. That goes for the entire beef industry. The third pattern is from pop health book authors and social media stars who are often the same. Their books vastly outsell books from actual scientists who do actual scientific research in their specialties. Unfortunately for scientists, their data rarely supports food that is profitable for food giants to sell, so the merchants of doubt come for them. I have a unique perspective on this because first, I grew up in the 60s when scientists were our heroes and they graced the cover of magazines. And second, I've worked in fields where companies feel the need to unleash the merchants of doubt like they did in climate science, and I've worked in fields like the development of cell phones where they didn't feel the need to. I know, because I've been perceived as a biased idiot and as a rock star, depending on the field I worked in and whether merchants of doubt were there. So the patterns in fields like nutrition where the food giants hired merchants of doubt is most people are confused, and yet most people have strong opinions on some things that are profitable for the food companies to sell. Are you getting enough protein? Because there's lots of ways to make that profitable. Fiber, not so much. And the influencers are not actually doing science. They're typically good storytellers who tell us that scientists are incompetent. And who doesn't want to hear that when the scientists are telling us to cut back on the meat and sugar?
Meanwhile, if you like to eat healthy, too bad, because Krispy Kreme donuts are coming to McDonald's locations nationwide by the end of 2026. Because who among us hasn't polished off a double quarter pounder with cheese and then thought, now how do I reward myself?
And they spend a lot of time doing social media instead of doing science. For example, Peter Attia is a family physician who checks all those boxes. He wrote a popular blog saying even sixth graders would know things Stanford scientists don't. Kate offered to answer his questions, but he didn't respond.
He blogged that this study did not pass Science 101, that even a sixth grader would have known to isolate, a key variable, but you didn't. And one of the examples he used was you didn't match nutrients across the two diets. And I think you said early on you questioned that too, and then Christopher Gardner explained why you didn't do that.
I mean, I had said, my background was much more molecular, and so, I remember my first or second lab meeting, I'm like, why aren't we controlling for fiber? Why aren't we controlling for protein? And Christopher was like, okay, so we're doing a behavioral intervention. The intervention is prescribing the vegan diet or the omnivorous diet, and then part of the intervention, the vegans may eat higher fiber, and we're going to find that because the intervention was giving these two different diets, and so that kind of made it click for me because I thought, I had always worked with mice. You give them the diet, they eat it, you can match it exactly, right? And this was a real world intervention. This answers a different question, right? It says, okay, when you take this into the real world, how do people behave? What do people eat? What do people do? So just, the study was not designed to answer those more specific questions.
Well, it's a lot more interesting for me this way because I was very interested in healthy omnivore versus healthy vegan. But I have known that people who eat omnivore end up eating less fiber than people who eat vegan. And to try to match those just seems artificial.
Yeah, it can be really challenging. I mean, we did a whole exercise in the lab meeting. He was way too nice and letting me basically dominate this lab meeting where it's like, okay, if you match fiber, then it's really hard to match this. And I'm sure you can design a diet, but when you're having individuals prepare their own foods, that's where it gets really tricky.
Yeah. Peter has the very popular message that most people, including the food giants, want to hear. You should consume 2 to 3 times the recommendations for protein. Animal protein is superior and it can be loaded with salt. That makes him a really popular guest on mega shows hosted by Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, and Andrew Huberman.
I do want to go like on a few months to switch to a vegan diet at some point, to really try it.
Yeah, I haven't done it yet because I'm afraid I'm going to function better. I do love steak, I do. So I'm afraid I'm going to feel better.
And his book doubles down on the other popular message in fields where merchants of doubt play their tricks. You can't trust science. I made an episode about his book. To be fair, his book is great when it comes to exercise. I think that's because companies haven't hired merchants of doubt to destroy our faith in exercise science. There is profit to be made there. The fourth set of patterns comes from the low-carb, high-meat community. Several of us are friends like Nick Norwitz, Dave Feldman, and I, and we're doing our best to understand each other. We do share a mutual disdain for junk food. These Twinkies have been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 years, and not even the ants or bacteria will touch them. They're not stupid. But still, the gulf between me and the high-meat community remains tragically large. And it isn't just one thing. It's 10 things I just haven't been able to relate to. Here's just a few. The suspicion of conspiracies among our leading scientists.
And what you're about to find out when we look at this science is that some things were measured and some things weren't. Some things were deliberately left out of the study, and it makes you just question things a little bit more.
The willingness to make bold statements among your millions of subscribers when you haven't even looked into the basic facts.
They had the mayor of New York City, what's his name? Something. He's
Booker?
vegan.
Brooker?
Booker was the senator. Anyway, I mean, who cares what a senator and a city mayor have to say about nutrition?
Eric had very severe type 2 diabetes before going through a Cleveland Clinic program, writing a book about it and teaming up with New York doctors and hospitals to address the diabetes epidemic with phenomenal success. The willingness to give a doctor's response to the documentary when you've only watched a small piece of it.
You know, this massively popular Netflix series, and I watched the first episode, and I couldn't go any further than that.
And relied on Nina Teicholz, who makes things up, to do the research.
Then I went to research about it. I read Nina Teicholz Substack, Reddit article about it. I read the Wikipedia article about it.
The willingness to go low.
Pat Brown, the CEO, or former CEO and founder of Impossible Burger, who, you know, he reminded me a bit of an old woman when he appeared. I thought, again, he looked like he'd been dug up, quite honestly.
The willingness to dismiss decades of data by young doctors who aren't scientists and weren't involved in the collection of that data.
This lecture is about the science, which contradicts nearly everything I learned about LDL in medical school.
And is it just me, or are high-meat diets the only ones who haven't been able to show that populations can live long on them? Whenever I ask, I get scattered anecdotes, but there is a ton of data to show the reverse. Which brings me to the central criticism the low-carb community had about the first paper, whose primary outcome was LDL cholesterol.
The question is, what is the evidence that high LDL will kill you? This systematic review answered that question. 19 prospective cohort studies with over 68,000 participants were reviewed, and the overwhelming finding was that individuals with the highest LDL levels lived the longest.
Just to be clear, that claim was for people over 60, which is the age group this paper is about. But it did raise a fascinating question. Why is total cholesterol a risk factor for cardiovascular disease in the young and middle-aged, but not in elderly people? That isn't a question they could answer because this paper is based on data from the elderly. This paper is Exhibit A for the desperate need to listen to scientists who actually conduct real research. The paper is a meta-analysis, meaning anyone with a computer and internet connection can do it. The lead author, Uffe Ravnskov, has been an independent researcher since 1979, which seems to mean largely commenting on other scientists' research as he did with this paper. The second author is David Diamond, who is a professor in the Department of Psychology who has no background in actual heart disease research. I made 2 episodes about him. There were very thorough responses on the British Medical Journal site from very qualified doctors and scientists who had this to say. 1, 2/3 of the population this paper reported on were from one study. That paper screened their subjects to have no known heart disease or diabetes at the start. They noted that screened out the people most predisposed to heart disease. including ones who had died of heart disease in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. Second, during the 8 years of that study, 30% of the population went on statins and they experienced lower mortality. And yet, Uffe and David referenced that paper to claim statins are ineffective and higher LDL means a longer life. 3, heart disease is multifactorial. We all know that. LDL is one thing, but so is high blood pressure, smoking, weight, diabetes, stress, exercise, etc. Uffe's paper doesn't factor those in. If you made it to 60 without being diagnosed with heart disease yet, it's a pretty good bet that a lack of some of those other risk factors had something to do with it. 4, their paper states that atherosclerosis typically begins in middle age. All evidence points to it starting much earlier, hence heart attacks typically starting around age 40. 5, genetic studies called Mendelian randomization clearly show the dramatic role genes play in determining your LDL levels, and how dramatically that determines your heart disease risk. When Uffe was confronted with that, he said, well, maybe it has to do with undiscovered genes. Who knows? I'm not making that up. I'm not seeing any doubt among scientists who actually conduct heart disease studies that LDL is a causal factor. You might be disillusioned, as I am, that the British Medical Journal would publish a paper like this. But as David Teicholz, who is a very good scientist, pointed out in The Triumph of Doubt,
so, is the problem here the academic journals? In part, yes. Academic journals are a big business, both for professional societies that sponsor them and for publishers that produce them.
So even they can't resist the temptation sometimes to go for the views, and this paper did get views. So what did scientists who actually conduct nutrition research think of the Stanford twin study? The most cited scientist in all of medicine is Walter Willett. I was in his home with Nick Norwitz in January, and I almost asked him about the Stanford twin study, but he had just told us that one of his filters was to ignore any nutrition study of less than a year duration. I sometimes use that filter too, so I bit my tongue. But this study was an exception for me, and I found out later it was an exception for Walter too. Here's what he told Vox. It was very nicely conducted, especially because both the vegan and omnivore diets were quite healthy, and its findings are highly consistent with existing nutrition and environmental health research, which points to the need for people in rich countries to eat less meat and dairy and more plant-based foods. There is no body of evidence that conflicts with the finding that a healthy, plant-based vegan diet, as implemented in this study, is better than a typical omnivore diet. What about scientists who weren't as convinced as Walter? One of those is Louie Psihoyos of Stanford, who is the second author of the Epigenetics paper about the Stanford twin study. That paper concluded, notably, the vegan cohort exhibited a significant decrease in epigenetic age acceleration, as demonstrated by reductions in multiple epigenetic aging clocks, all of which were trained upon clinical and phenotypic scores. But Lucia had some important cautions.
But there were also some weaknesses. So we included only 44 people, and the study was of short duration, only for 8 weeks. In addition, it's important to stress that without proper supplementation, a vegan diet can be incomplete.
I am hypersensitive about corporate funding, but this wasn't funded by Beyond Meat like the supplement salesman claimed. If it was, would the documentary have featured their competitor, the founder of Impossible Foods? By the way, Pat Brown was a very respected professor in Stanford School of Medicine before founding Impossible after he came to grips with the ginormous impact of beef on the planet. Like me, he's 70, but how did he keep his hair and I didn't? That's not fair. There were 3 sources of funding: the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, a Stanford Award unit funded by the NIH, and the philanthropist Kyle Voigt. He's a tech executive who's a funder of the Oceanic Preservation Society. Earth scientists like me bow down to somebody who will fund a worthy cause like that. There is no doubt that he and Louie are driven by concern for the environment and the animals. They knew veganism was best for both of those, but they took a chance with this study.
And all the results were blinded, meaning that the twins knew what they were eating, but when we did the results, we didn't know. So so people say, well, you're cherry picking the results. Well, we knew one group of twins was doing better at the end, but we didn't know which one until we unblinded it. And, I had my fingers crossed that, the plant-based twins would do better, but we didn't know. I wanted to know the truth. And I thought, I'm going to lose my community, because if we start, coming out like it's really in favor of, the omnivore diet, you have to look at that. I just wanted the facts. And I was like, I just want to know so that I don't squander my life, like, touting some, an agenda that's not based on the truth. So that was it. And I was on pins and needles for, several years. And the most remarkable one was the telomeres. They were like, nobody saw that coming. Nobody. Wow. But Chris said, in 8 weeks, it's going to be too short of a time. Nobody's ever, detected telomere length change in that amount of time. Just save your money. I said, well, I don't want to save my money. It was actually Kyle Voigt's money. He's the founder of Cruise. He put up the money for that, for the testing.
So if you concluded that this documentary was all about promoting veganism, you were right. That's what Louie wanted to do. He just wanted it to be accurate. So after all that, what do I think? First, I'm going to reserve some judgment because there is more to come.
These twins' microbiomes were shifting throughout the course of the study, so even if they started more similar, we expect them to shift throughout the duration of the study because they're put on 2 different diets. Matthew Carter is a grad student in the Sonnenberg lab. He's working on this research and will be publishing it in the next, probably within the year. Second, it didn't answer my question about longevity because it was only 8 weeks, but what we did see was very encouraging, no? Third, I wish they had done DEXA scans for everyone. I couldn't make sense of the 8 DEXA scans they did do. 4, I was startled by the difference in protein consumption.
Protein dropped quite dramatically on the vegan diet to something like 13% of calories, 14% whereas it was like 20% on the omnivore. That's a big difference.
Yeah, it really is a big difference. Again, this is like back in my early lab meeting days. I wanted protein to be matched because you want to see all the macronutrients matched, and that's usually just something that is different between a vegan diet and omnivorous diet. Not always, but typically.
The thing is, longevity scientists tend to recommend eating moderate protein, sticking to the guidelines, and the fitness community tends to recommend higher. The epigenetic clocks in this study seem to favor the more moderate vegan levels of protein.
They showed a slower pace of aging based on 3 different epigenetic clocks we tested in our study.
And perhaps scientists from the 60s were right, and beans provide a longevity benefit over animal protein. 5, I would love to see this study repeated for people who have modern plagues like diabetes and heart disease. Any philanthropist out there willing to step up and fund it? I know at least 2 of you are watching this. They don't like funding things where their names get dragged through the mud for doing it. 6, I wasn't surprised that most twins decided to eat less meat after the study but not go full vegan. When you get out to the edges of no animal foods or no carbs, it is a bigger ask.
They're explaining it to you. You're like, I can have a 6-egg omelet with bacon, fried in an inch of hog lard, and lose weight. Sign me up, Slim. Hallelujah. Let's go. That's week 1. I'm in week 12, y'all. Week 12's different. Because I've lost some weight, and also, I want to murder my family. So, turns out, carbohydrates is what's holding civilization together. In case you're wondering what was doing it. That's right.
I've heard both Christopher and Walter say they're not trying to get the world to go vegan, just to eat more plants and less meat. Hear, hear. And last, when more papers come out about the twins experiment, I expect more head explosions on the internet.